Thom Hartmann here on the best of the rest of economic and labor news. You need to know this. If you don't like any part of the upcoming trade deals, too bad. As of last Wednesday, our elected members of Congress can no longer change or amend those agreements thanks to the 60 senators who gave President Obama the sole authority to decide the details. And that power extends to whoever gets elected as our next president as well. Despite overwhelming public pressure against so-called fast-track legislation and the trade deals currently being negotiated, 13 Democrats sided with Republicans and said that it's just fine for corporate trade lobbyists to determine the economic future of our nation. And that future doesn't look very bright for American workers now. Just like we saw in the run-up to NAFTA, the president and his trade representative promised that these agreements will increase exports and force our trading partners to address issues like climate change and slave labor. And just like in those previous deals, those promises are nothing but hype. We know that when corporations have their way, they will always put profit over people. We know that without fair trade, American workers will never be able to compete with slave wages in foreign nations. Corporations don't care about livable wages or climate change or the safety of our food supply, but they do care about lowering costs and increasing profits. And those are the only things they'll be worrying about as they decide on the details of these massive trade agreements. The only thing standing in their way now is President Obama, the very same man who has been touting the benefits of free trade. Call the White House and call Congress and tell them to stop the TPP while we still have a chance. Less than a week after Pope Francis dismantled the Republican talking points on climate change, the Holy Father spoke out against those who make and invest in weapons of war. Last week, while speaking to a crowd of young people in Turin, Italy, Pope Francis said, "People, managers, businessmen who call themselves Christian and they manufacture weapons, that leads to a bit of distrust, doesn't it?" In other words, the Pope said that it's hypocritical to call yourself a Christian while manufacturing or funding instruments of death. Well, it isn't the first time the pontiff spoke out against the weapons industry. These harshest comments and recent comments could be the harshest yet for the individuals who he previously called merchants of death. These are the people who make, sell, and invest in weapons of war while calling themselves pro-life. Pope Francis said, quote, "Duplicity is the currency of today. They say one thing and do another." That hypocrisy is nothing new in our country, but it's nice to see that someone is willing to call out the gun makers for being an industry of death. Donald Trump can bankrupt as many businesses as he'd like, but students aren't entitled to that same luxury even when they're living on disability benefits. Last week, the Think Progress blog told the story of Monica Stitt, who doesn't qualify for debt cancellation because a federal judge thinks she isn't facing undue hardship. Considering that Monica lives only on disability benefits and public assistance, it's unclear how much harder her life must become before she's eligible for debt forgiveness. And the story makes clear that it is nearly impossible to escape the burden of student loans, while corporations and billionaires can get out of their debts without much more than a stroke of a pen. Something is seriously wrong with this system. Student loan debt in this country has topped $1 trillion, and more students fall into default every day. High-quality education should be a right in our nation, not a privilege, and no one should be burdened with a lifetime of debt for going to college. We need to change the laws to help people like Monica, and we need to keep fighting until all students can attend a public university free of charge. Randy Weingarten is the president of the American Federation of Teachers, so she knows a thing or two about unions. That's why she says it's time for interns to form a labor group of their own. Last week, Weingarten wrote an article for Alternet about the value of work done by interns and the injustice of their low or non-existent pay. In addition to being unfair to these interns, this practice has also allowed many companies to use unpaid labor as a replacement for full-time employees. Randy wrote, quote, "Now, thanks to the organizing of one savvy group of union interns, the tide might be about to turn," end quote. Paid interns at AFT recently held a groundbreaking vote to be represented by a local union and formed the very first non-medical intern bargaining group in our nation. And President Weingarten called on other groups to do the same. She said, "At the ATF, we are simply practicing what we preach." Congratulations to those interns for forming their new union and for inspiring all of us to continue the fight for fair pay. And finally, California just got another big reason to legalize pot. In fact, that state just got about 500 million reasons. According to California's Legislative Analysis Office, legalizing cannabis could provide that state with as much as $500 million in net revenue every year. That agency is responsible for the financial analysis of legislation, but the LAO takes no position on policy. Their analysis found that law enforcement in the Golden State could save $100 million or more by avoiding the costs associated with arrests and prosecution for pot, and that saving would be complemented by several hundred millions of dollars in taxes on cannabis. In a huge state like California, $500 million won't solve all the budget woes, but it's one heck of a step in the right direction. Between medical benefits and economic gains, it's a wonder that California, and every other state for that matter, hasn't come around to the positive side of legal pot. But with numbers like these, it's only a matter of time before all state, local, and federal governments will have to recognize that it's time to legalize cannabis once and for all. And that's the way it is for the week of June 29th, 2015. I'm Thom Hartmann on the Economic and Labor News.